Awesome. All right. The good news is there's a lot of stuff to go through. Because I don't get to talk about Team Topologies very often, so I come here and I get really excited about sharing all the things that I've been working on. And so if you were here to hear about the book, you'll get a little bit of that, but I wanted to spend most of my time talking about how I see flow engineering as an on-ramp to Team Topologies and an enabler of working with Team Topologies. And I'll use some client work to kind of illustrate how that happens in the real world in my experience. So first of all, I don't know how many people have seen this, but I talk about it a lot. When we're working in teams and large organizations with knowledge work, there are a lot of things that get in the way of us getting our work done. And I don't mean to block all my slides, but these are very common situations that get in the way of us being productive, right? And if we think about any particular aspect of a value stream, any particular activity, there's a lot of things that are happening that are not adding value. And this has very serious consequences, right? A lot of times our individual engineers are not able to invest enough time in doing valuable work, which has negative consequences for them, negative consequences for the organization, and really just saps our motivation, right? And our ability to achieve what we need to achieve. And if we think about this in a collective context, in the context of an entire value stream, we're just draining our ability to deliver value with all the delays and all of the friction and complication that happens throughout a value stream. And flow engineering is really about addressing that and getting it out of the way of us producing our best work. So if we think about the typical path through the value stream, what are we talking about when we're talking about value streams? Essentially, it's just the path through the organization that the work takes to deliver value, all the way from inception to delivery to customers. And this is really important because that's the scale that matters in terms of organization. So if we're thinking about team topologies and teams, we need to roll it all up into the context of the overall organization if we're talking about delivering value in most cases. In a lot of cases, we can deliver a feature in a team, we can deliver maybe a component or an API, but the entire experience that's delivered to the customer is what matters, and sometimes that requires many, many stakeholders across multiple silos, especially when we're talking about global organizations. So this is what I talk about when I'm talking about a value stream. Typically, we can only see a small portion of what's going on, which means that there's pieces here that are out of our scope, out of our visibility, and that becomes a real problem. So how can we avoid implementing something like Team Topologies in isolation? If we're talking about this value stream and the flow of work all the way across the organization, we might have multiple teams, we might have multiple functions, or even divisions or regions involved in delivering that work. And if we look at the entire scope and consider that we only have siloed visibility into a portion of that overall flow, that means that we're going to spend time fixing or addressing concerns in that narrow scope, which means we may, and we often do, miss a constraint that's outside of our visibility, right? And that constraint is what's holding back the entire system and should be stopping us from micro-optimizing, right? Investing in changes and improvements that aren't actually going to have a major impact on the customer experience or the ultimate outcome that we're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of things that happen that we can track, a lot of things that we can measure, a lot of things that we can see, but a lot of things that we can't see often have larger impact, and they're much harder to tackle, especially with tools and technologies and things that we're used to working with. So if we want to implement a large-scale change initiative, if we want to reorganize, if we want to change the topologies of our teams, we need to be considering the fact that we have different perspectives coming together in order to make that happen. And we need to consider those separate perspectives in whatever proposal or solution that we're putting together. There's different goals across these different stakeholder groups, right? Different groups in the organizations have different priorities, And we don't want the lowest common denominator. We want the highest common interest to be satisfied, right? We don't want to just be doing the least that we can. We want the most that we can collectively achieve. And we're often talking in terms of different scopes of stack, of time horizon, of detail versus big picture, strategy versus tactics versus operations. And so we need ways of bringing all these things together to productively create solutions and reorganize or just align ourselves to better flow. So this is something that I have had a lot of experience and a lot of success with using mapping and collaborative mapping in order to sort out all that chaos and bring people together and align those perspectives towards something that actually makes a difference for flow. So if we talk about our first starting points with that, alignment, bringing those perspectives together is super important, and focusing on what are we actually trying to do, right? It's not good enough to say, hey, we should organize for fast flow. That should be in service of something, right? That should be in service of customer outcomes or revenue or cost savings or something that really matters to everybody in the business, or at least the levels that you are trying to convince to give you budget, space, resources, et cetera, et cetera. So from there, we look at what are we actually doing today? So what is the flow of work currently across teams, inside teams, at whatever scope? Commonly, what we're looking at with flow engineering is the release process. What does it take to deliver a changed, improved version of what you are creating as an organization? And we look across all the activities that it takes to make that happen, which often is a lot more than you'd expect. And we also go a little bit deeper than the initial flow to look at where we have constraints, where we have issues, what are behind those issues. So we dig into dependencies as well. And that's where we start to build out a network view of the different teams that are involved in delivering a solution or delivering a feature. And then we take all that and imagine what does good look like? What would a better system look like? And we can bring a bunch of different insights from the various mapping exercises, from all of our resources that are available, all the conversations that we have during these mapping sessions to create a roadmap which makes it actionable, makes it owned by individuals and people who are going to make sure that things happen. And we can assign measures of progress to that to make sure that we know we're on the right track as we go. So how can flow engineering help with a Team Topologies effort, or in enabling Team Topologies to kind of evolve in your organization over time? It provides an easy on-ramp for people who are outside of this initiative, or you just making sense of things and trying to line up all the raw material and context that it takes to make good decisions about how you should organize. So the mapping can form this understanding for you to use as a reference to draw insights from, to understand where is the flow breaking down and what might we do about addressing those concerns. It builds alignment because what we're doing when we're mapping is we're doing it together with people. We're creating a shared view that brings us all onto the same page and shares different senses of value and direction and incentive so that we can all understand what motivates everybody else and how we can be commonly motivated by high-level value and things that we really need to get done from an organizational perspective. Often we have localized concerns that hold us back. And we can bring all that together and try and align to a North Star, something that we all have in common that can bring people to the table and get them excited. So it also boosts engagement. A lot of these things struggle to get started. You might lose momentum because it's a big job to reorganize around flow. Often we don't even really know what that looks like. But by stepping through very specific mapping practices, we know where we are at any given moment. We know what our destination is, and we are stepping through incremental activities that bring us closer to our ability to reorganize with confidence. So holistically, this looks like a bunch of different activity on a digital whiteboard. So we often use Miro or Mural, but you can use anything that you have available. You can even just use a wall and a bunch of sticky notes. But this is increasingly digital just because we have folks often from different regions participating, with different availabilities. Some people are home, some people are in the office, and this works really well. It also is a great way to capture things for the future and iterate on the actual maps themselves as you go forward. So you can have these as living workspaces that change along with your understanding of what's happening and where you're going. So in terms of a value stream map, very, very simple example, but we're able to, using this basic skeleton of what's happening and what are the stages of activities that happen, to layer on a bunch of different information. We can represent where we see rework, where we see missing criteria, bad requirements resulting in confusion or delay downstream, where we see high cognitive load because we have lots of tools involved, lots of components, lots of artifacts being created or consumed. And we can dig deeper in here wherever we see opportunities to find out what's behind the delay here, what's behind the complexity that we're seeing in the value stream. So in a more common example, we see something a much more large scale than this. We're often not trying to go for hundreds of stages, but we might get up to 20 stages. We might have some things happening in parallel. We'll have comments represented on the board. We have lots of information that we can layer on top of this basic structure. And then we can look at how do we reorganize that for better flow? How do we pull non-value added activities out to operate in parallel? How do we offload them to passive or automated activities so that we spend more time in the value stream on human activities and things that require people to do to get the best outcome? When we look across multiple value streams, we can start to see common constraints and concerns that help reveal the underlying interconnections between streams, the common dependencies. Often these are the biggest opportunities and where you might want to see a transition from a shared services team to a platform team, or talk about why your platform team isn't actually a platform team, because it turns out it's holding back all these teams that should be able to access something via self-service. So being able to connect these streams, find commonalities, common struggles, and see those connections is your first step to building out the value stream network that is all the interconnected flow in your organization at large scale. So if we're talking about how we go from flow engineering to team topologies, often what happens is we start from a value stream, or at least in my experience, people bring me in to map value streams and then look at the larger network as a result of digging into those dependencies and finding common issues. So if we're going from stream to network, first of all, what we do, we highlight what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? This is so easy to skip. It's so easy to assume that we all know what we're trying to do, but there's magic in clarifying it and making sure that it's absolutely clear to everybody. Then we'll look at one value stream. Often we'll map two value streams so that we can start to see commonalities and those common dependencies. And then we'll dig into those dependencies, and that becomes the foundation of our understanding of the value stream network. We sort of start in one place and start to fan out to see, okay, well, that is delivered by this group, and this is supported by that group, and you start to see the network grow. And then we can use that information about the performance of all those teams, which ones are common dependencies, which ones are high cognitive load or often held back by, let's say, immature practices. And we can start to reorganize them around team topologies that work best for the needs of the organization and the network as a whole. Sometimes we go from network to stream. So I unfortunately missed Suzanne's talk earlier. She would probably 100% talk about this which with more detail than I would, but hopefully you have some understanding of when we're talking about the large scale network and we get there through something like Wardley mapping, we still want to understand what our target outcome is first, but we might be jumping directly into the value stream network by looking at a Wardley map of different capabilities that the group delivers. So if that's your lens and you're starting from, we have a bunch of interconnected capabilities, then you want to understand how are those actually delivered. So we can figure out where are the common choke points, where are the points in that value stream network where we have a lot of dependencies. They're connected to a lot of different teams. And so if we are to elevate their performance, we are unlocking better performance for all those interdependent teams. And then we might zoom into that area where we see a constraint or a high degree of dependency and understand what is their flow, what's holding them back, how do we level them up so they level up everyone who depends on them. And we can use that information to reorganize, so to pick team topologies that better fit that operating model. So what this often looks like in engagements that I run is we will work from a customer perspective to look at what are the needs of the customer, what are the things that they're coming to us for, what is the value that they're getting from our organization, and how is that delivered to them. So we'll use a customer journey map often, or we'll use kind of a customer operational map. What are they doing when they come to us on a regular basis after they've become a customer? But that connects to their needs, that connects to capabilities that are delivering solutions to satisfy those needs. And then there's the teams and value streams that are delivering those capabilities. So we can work backwards from customers. And this is a great way to bridge the gap between team topologies and the business that really doesn't care about how things get done, but they want customer outcomes. They want things to be delivered. They want value to be delivered to customers. So we can map this a number of different ways. This is kind of the network in view. But if we're starting from a value stream, then we can also place that in the context of a customer, and we can look at what is actually involved behind the scenes to support all of this. And this is where I think Team Topologies is very valuable, to think about what is underpinning each of these activities that we perform across the value stream. What are the supporting and enabling capabilities that are delivered by other teams that we depend on? And this is, again, another way of building out that inside-out view to see what's actually behind all the things that we take for granted, or all the things that we go run around to consume or put together. How do we make that self-service? How do we make it so that we can just grab it when we need it in line or in time? So we have various platforms. It was great to hear Manuel talk this morning about different platforms that people might not necessarily think of as platforms, but I think he said it very well. Anything that really enables self-service and enables the teams that depend on the availability of capabilities to be able to get those self-service on demand whenever they want without interrupting a team to get it, I think is really a key factor in unlocking fast flow. And so another way that we can look at this is backwards from the customer. So if we think about customers and what they need, they're coming to us to satisfy specific needs, to do specific things. And then we have products that are supporting those needs and satisfying the needs. And they are supported by runtime capabilities. So there's different aspects of this that we need to consider. And in some of my clients, all they care about is runtime. They care about what's happening for the customer who's trying to do the thing that they want to do. And so I can work backwards from that to get to team topologies and then port that over to the value stream. And often that's what I'm doing. I'm talking about, okay, let's meet you where you are. The model that you're talking about is how do customers do the thing that the feature delivers? And then we work backwards to talk about, okay, that's actually delivered and enabled by these core APIs that are underpinning the mobile experience, and they are sitting on top of platforms that allow them to access data and different capabilities. This is just another way of kind of visualizing and meeting people where they are with whatever the frame that they're in looks like. Some people are talking about runtime, some people are talking about build time. Most of the time, when I'm talking to teams, they're talking about build time. They're talking about value streams, which is how do we get the thing done? Because the big bottleneck, the big constraint and concern is how do we work faster? How do we work more effectively? How do we get rid of all the toil and delay? So we focus more of our time on build time, but build time is in service of runtime. And so being able to tie these views together and have a cohesive view of what we're doing and why we're doing it, or what happens when we ship our software, I think is really helpful to build a view that not only leverages, underlying team dependencies and self-service and all the things that we care about, but puts it in the context of anybody in the organization can come to this and say, oh, I recognize this, and I can work backwards from that to this context that you're talking about. So this is another way of just meeting people where they are and bringing them into a shared understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about dependencies or we're talking about platforms, right? Because often we have our understanding of this and someone else is coming in and they hear platform and they're thinking something completely different, right? So I love working backwards. So what this looks like if I'm illustrating this backwards from a customer, which is what my senior executives and my board members care about. I have a customer, they have needs that is satisfied by delivered products that have dependencies that my delivery teams rely on. And those dependencies also have dependencies, right? So we see the network everywhere. We see these dependencies on dependencies. And sometimes that leads us to go and diagnose a flow issue way deep down in the stack because it's actually holding all those dependencies back. Another way to think about this is if we are thinking from the runtime perspective, we can also work backwards through what are the applications and their runtime dependencies and what those runtime dependencies actually rely on. So from any perspective, we can sort of craft this narrative, and I have to use these all the time because different people that I'm talking to in the organization are listening for different things, or they're coming with a specific context. And so these are different ways of illustrating the same thing for an audience that is only listening for something very specific, right? Or they're coming in with a very specific frame. So if you are in your organization talking about team topologies and it's going over everyone's head, or eventually you hit a wall where you can't transform it into action, maybe some different ways of visualizing how it fits into your organization and how it supports your activities could be helpful. Another way that I want to illustrate this, and I often illustrate it, is, again, we're working back from a customer outcome that is delivered by, in a lot of organizations that I'm working with, we're building experience streams, which is what the customer actually interacts with. And that is supported by and underpinned by development platforms that are supporting that delivery. And that is also supported in part from infrastructure teams, data platform teams, or integration platform teams. So we can show layers that speak to the network, the interdependencies across all of these streams and how they all fit together. Something that we touch on in the book that I think is really key to supporting this work of adopting team topologies, getting off the ground, overcoming flow problems, and accelerating teams are enabling teams. I'm a huge fan of enabling teams. So something we talk about in the book is a flow enabling team, someone inside of your organization or a group of people who are running value stream mapping exercises, who are running workshops to diagnose flow issues, bringing teams together to talk about how they have common dependencies and how they might address them. So I think this is a pattern that I'd love to hear more about from folks if you are standing up something like this in your organization. But I find that enabling teams are really the way that we bridge the gap between everything that doesn't work automatically today and not being stuck doing nothing, right? An enabling team can be that oil in the machine, the facilitators of flow where there isn't any automated flow yet. So, a couple of things that I want to leave folks with. I think mapping is really important to do in a group with various stakeholders, with various perspectives. Oftentimes, I'm sure we all get the tendency to go map a bunch of things ourselves and straighten them out in our own heads, but we get much better results when we do that with a group because our assumptions are our assumptions, and we can't take it for granted that other people understand what we're talking about. We could show them a perfect map, and if it's not from their perspective, then it might go right over their heads. So this iterative act, this collaborative act of mapping together really helps you avoid those situations where you deliver something perfect that just falls on the floor. So what do we get from flow engineering, especially in the context of team topologies? We all want to enable flow. And what we want to do is, in order to do that, we have to focus. We have to be aware of our surroundings, our current state, and we have to have a clear vision of the future state. We have to understand not only that for ourselves, but how do we communicate that effectively to stakeholders who might not care about what we're doing at all, right? So we need to be able to be accurate in our communication. And all of that really depends on having a strong understanding of why are we doing this, what is the value that we're trying to achieve, what is the clear problem that we're trying to overcome. And so, again, I'm working backwards. If we want to enable fast flow, you really need to have a clear sense of what is holding you back and why is it important that you address this. So I think these three elements are really important for that. But what happens when we address these gaps and we're able to actually deliver? We have unified perspectives. We have all these stakeholders, all these people who care about their own little piece of the puzzle, able to align with everyone else and their pieces to build the larger whole and the overall sense of better performance. We are able to unify our targets. Sometimes we're not going to get other people to share our goals, but a win-win scenario might be appealing to something that is more important to both of us, right? And bridges the gap between my concerns and your concerns. So being very clear about how we get there is really important. I think mapping is an excellent way to get there. And then again, we're talking about the same things on the same time horizon with the same language. And that's really important. A lot of times we're bringing together different stakeholders. They have very different senses of what are we talking about, right? Are we talking about today? Are we talking about in the future? Are we talking about the past? Are we talking about near-term, short-term strategy, tactics, operations? There's a lot we take for granted there. And so being clear about this is the scope, this is the time horizon, and you kind of get that for free when you're mapping, right? You're illustrating it visually. So I want to leave you with organizing for fast flow is the activity of flow engineering. You are engineering flow by organizing teams and addressing flow concerns. And so I consider everybody in this room and everybody at this conference a flow engineer. And I hope that you connect with me and share your stories and your concerns and your challenges, because I'd love to hear about them. I'd love to share my experience with you and learn from you, because I think this is largely unexplored territory. There's lots of new stuff that we're doing here, and that gets me really excited. So if you're interested about the book and you'd like to see more about that, there's a site, flowengineering.org, that has information about it, but you can grab a copy. It's released on everything now, and thanks for your time.